Alright, so the first thing you want to do is trace your pattern onto a piece of template material. In this case I've used masonite. That's a great surface to run a router around. It's inexpensive and it lasts, so it's a good thing to use. I'm sure there's other things you could use as well. So what we want to do is put our pattern on the plywood. In this case I'm using 5/8 exterior grade sheathing, and it's just because I happen to have it. Any wood would do. You could use solid cedar and then you wouldn't have to paint it. Anyway, this works just fine, so it's what we're going to use. So go ahead and trace it, leaving a bit of room. You can see I've just traced it roughly, leaving about 1/8 of an inch proud of the pattern all the way around. We're going to cut that out with the jigsaw, again being sure not to cross the line so we have a bit of material to remove with the router afterwards. So I'll just cut that out and come back to the camera. Alright, so as you can see I cut these out now. Saw works great. If you have a bandsaw that would work too. One thing I should mention is if your plywood has one side that's good and another side that's rougher, you want to flip the pattern so you get a left and a right out of it. So once you've done that, take two of them, stack them together with your template. I like to clamp this up tight before I put the screws in, that way any bow or twist in the plywood or whatever material you're using won't be as big a factor in getting the pieces tight together. So we'll go ahead and clamp these up. I'm going to be using a router with a fresh trimmed bit. You can see it's got a bearing on the top. I'll pilot the bearing around the pattern, and you might want to turn down your audio for this. And I'm going to grab some ear protectors. So there we have a couple of side pieces matching our template. So the next thing we want to do is make the bottom piece that holds two sides together. So what I've done is I've just taken a piece of wood and I've picked up the angles from the template. And you can see I've set the table saw blade to give me that angle roughly there and that angle there. Okay, so we cut that to fit. And then I've rabbited the ends there to take the side pieces. That's what we're going to end up with, okay? I've also cut out of some scrap material a couple of pieces that are the same length as the distance between the two rabbets, and these are going to help support the sides so that we get a solid structure to wrap the roof around. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble that, and I'll be back in a minute. Couple of things on the bottom. You see I've made it out of a pretty thick piece of wood here, and that's just so I get good solid mounting when I go to put this on a fence or wherever. And I've also left this rabbet, as I mentioned before, this plywood happens to be 5/8 thick, so I've made this rabbet about 7/8, a little strong, almost almost an inch. And that's just to leave me room to put a radius on the two edges and kind of pretty it up a bit, but none of that really matters. You could just put a piece of plywood between the two sides if you wanted to do that, or come up with something more creative. It isn't going to matter. I've also put these supports in to hold the sides apart, and they're just, again, scrap lumber I had. They're about an inch and maybe 2 1/4 that way, so they're just to hold the sides apart. And when you assemble it all, I use waterproof glue. You'll want to glue it. Take a square, make sure your sides are square to the bottom. If they're not, give it a shove on the corner until it is square, and let it set up. And while that's gluing, we're going to go ahead and make the roof part. Okay, one other thing, on this cross piece, it should be right near the corner, because you're going to want to fasten the roof support at this edge, and that's where the most tension is, right here. So you're going to want this piece right at the lip. This one doesn't matter so much. There's no fasteners go into this, and it really doesn't matter. So this is the critical one. Make sure it's at the edge there, and you'll see the corners stick out. I'm going to hit that with a hand plane. I just take a block plane and match the radius to the sides. Okay, so I'll do that and work on cutting the roof panel out, and get back on camera in a minute. The material I'm going with for the roof of these is a fiberglass panel. I just got this at the local building supply. It's pebbled on one side, smooth on the other. Makes a nice waterproof roof. I'm going to go ahead and cut this with an angle grinder with a metal cut-off wheel in it. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it, but that seems to work for me. So again, it's going to be a bit noisy here. I'll cut that out and go from there. I've made this one 13 inches by, I believe it's 26, but I better check. Yes, 26, 13 inches wide. This one's going to give me a bit more overhang than the last one I did. Lots of room here for design. You could taper it, rounded ends. I will be rounding the corners off, but otherwise this one's just going to be a straight rectangle. Okay, we're back to the main part of the bee house. You can see I've taken a block plane and just matched the radius there. I've also sized this to be 8 inches between these the gables, and that's so I can fit 2 stacks of these commercial mason bee houses in there. It ends up being that they stack 11 tall and 2 wide, so giving you 22 of these trays in each bee house, which is quite a bit actually. So the whole thing can be scaled. You can make these pieces longer, this piece wider, and you could end up with more capacity. You could also narrow it up, make it fit one stack high. It doesn't matter. Okay, so we're on to the hardest part of the whole thing, which is the wrestling match between us and this fiberglass sheet. So we're going to bend this around, and that's what's going to give us the roof. This is quite stiff, and it doesn't like to make this initial bend here. This is where I start, is at the front or the top, I've cut a couple of sticks here to support the fiberglass. I'm going to be sandwiching the fiberglass between the sticks using stainless steel screws. You're going to want to use stainless steel screws so you don't get ugly rust streaks on your bee house here. Alright, so I do this on the grass so I don't snap this against a pebble or something, so I'm going to be moving over to the lawn to wrestle this in place. So again, I'll be fastening the pre-drilled stick on the front there with the screws, using washers to spread the load, holding it tight as I work it around. If you've got help, now might be a good time. You're going to want to watch too that it doesn't float away from this and then you get fastened on here and you have a gap. Okay, so make sure it stays tight the whole way. As you pull it around and get to the bottom, put the other stick on. Again, have it pre-drilled so it's ready to go. And drive a couple of screws in to hold her. It would be smart to paint this at this stage so you didn't have to watch that you didn't get paint on the roof. That would be the smart thing to do, but it's not what I'm going to do today. So, up to you. You can see I've clamped this material in place here. It makes it a lot easier to get started. You want to get it on there square, and then you can put the first couple of screws in. What I've done to get started here is I've clamped this piece in place. Like so. Made sure that the overhang is even all the way around. In this case it's 1 1/8 inches this way from the solid piece we put across inside there. You're going to want this piece to be roughly even with the front here so that you don't end up with a gap. So it needs to press down right towards the bottom of that radius. Okay, so clamp it in place, screw the batten in place with the stainless steel screws, and you're all set to start wrestling the fiberglass in place. You'll notice on this piece of wood, which is the batten for the other end of the fiberglass, I've cut a relief hole in the center here, and that's so that I can put a temporary screw just to hold the fiberglass in place, and later it'll be covered by the batten, so I can just leave it there. And that's just because I haven't got any help doing this, and it's a bit of a wrestling match. So here we go. Well, that looks alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put on the other batten. Because this piece is angled, you're going to want to watch that you put the batten on low enough that the screws don't end up going up inside the box. That should do it.